In 2024, the current generation Isuzu D-Max has come in for its midlife facelift, and it's going to go on sale officially on May 1st here in Australia. But the thing is though, there's no headline surprise about this one. No whole new engine, no flagship off-road monster to adorn the range. This is one for the true believers. So what do I mean by that? Well, Isuzu has gone back to the drawing board here and they've looked at all the different complaints and requests that customers and other people have made over the years. And they say that they've made those changes accordingly, which is something we always love to hear. Now, these updates are largely small things, but Isuzu reckons that collectively, they've made such a difference to the state of the D-Max that if you bought one back in 2022, they reckon there's incentive enough for you to upgrade. So are they correct? Well, today, that's what we're going to find out. But before we jump into today's video, please don't forget to like and subscribe and comment down below if you want to see more content like this.
Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by
Budget Direct.
With me today is the X-Train, which of course sits at the top of the range, but we are going to be talking more broadly about the new facelifted D-Max. Now, this model here, like the rest of the range, has had a bit of a price increase. It starts at a bit over $67,000 drive away, and you'll notice that I say drive away there, and that's because Isuzu has retained their current strategy of having the most expensive and the most affordable D-Max available with a national drive away price. The rest have regular old list prices, so prices are going to vary depending on what state you're in. Now, I said before that there was no new grades to the range, and that's kind of half true. You see, they've added the X Rider, which is more of a special edition previously, and made it a permanent fixture to the range. That one is based on the LSM, and the LSM and the X Rider have gone for a softer suspension setup for the 2024 model year to cater to those more family buyers, which really do seem to be flocking to the D-Max. But let's talk about design for a little bit. As you can see, there's been a few changes to the D-Max, and I think it's a bit of a case of like, I'm not sure a facelift actually improves the overall appearance of this vehicle. I think it was a bit more tidy previously, but there are some nice benefits. So there are these new headlights here, and notably, they've taken the indicators that were down here and they've integrated them into the main module. We've also got a new grille design here, more of a 3D-like effect, and this is more of a softer nose grille here. I'm told that's not to do with safety, but if I was going to be hit by a D-Max, I think it would rather be this one. Interestingly, they've also paid a little bit of attention to aerodynamics, similar to the Hilux GR Sport I drove the other day. Has a little bit more flow through down here by the bumper, though I'm told you still can't drive one upside down like a Formula One car. At the rear of the D-Max, they've updated the tail lights to a three-piece design with LED bulbs. Unfortunately though, that's only available on the top grades. The lower grades still use that old-fashioned two-piece design with halogen bulbs. A little bit disappointing there that they couldn't just update the look throughout the range. So what hasn't changed? Well, in a little bit of a down point for those who want to do a bit of towing, they still have drum brakes at the rear, so you don't get that increased heat dissipation from a disc brake design. Also, if we come around to the rear, this being the X-Train, we have this nice damped tailgate. Look, not exactly a must-have, but certainly nice to have if you do, and we reveal the tray here. And one real thing that annoys me about the D-Max is the lack of tie-down points. With the roller turnover cover we've got here, you only get two, one here and one here. When you don't have that, you get four in total. And you know, for a ute, I think I'd like to have more places to tie stuff down than not. So jumping into the interior of the D-Max, I think is where the facelift starts to make a little bit more sense. They've changed a number of things about this space, and I do think overall the usability has been improved. So in the center here, we have a new infotainment. It's still 9 inches in size on the X-Train and some of the other higher grades, but it does have a new software system backing it. It's a bit more snappier, and you do get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is fantastic for Android users like myself. Now, you'll notice that the squidgy buttons down here that, look, I personally didn't really like all that much have been replaced by some touch targets, and they do disappear, unfortunately, when you turn off the car. But we do have some volume knobs here, which is really great. I know a lot of people were annoyed about that. Not the first people and not the last people, I think, to add volume knobs back into cars. So fantastic to see. And on the topic of physical buttons, you do still have these ones here, which is really lovely. On some of the lower grades, it's more of a simplistic old style setup, but these are really quite lovely. I should also note on the lower grades, they've upgraded the base unit, which was a 7-inch unit to an 8-inch unit. And that also has wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as well. So a really good move there. We also have directly in front of me another display. This is a 7-inch one and it sits between two analog dials. It's kind of more of a stepping up market and trying to replicate things we've seen by some rivals. Kind of cool graphics, not really to my taste, but it does look very X-Terrain-ish, and there are a few more X-Terrain specific elements built in there. As far as usability, I don't think it does a whole lot more than the analog gauges did before it though. So, you know, that's a little bit disappointing, but it's there and I think some buyers will certainly appreciate that. There are a few other knickknacks about the interior, like for example, we've switched over to USB charging points, and they're not only the newer style, but they're also faster charging than they were previously. Directly in front of me, we've got the same sort of steering wheel that we're used to. I think it's a good wheel, this one, with some nice buttons here. No real reason to change it, but the center sort of design here has changed up a little bit. There are some other design elements around this cabin too. For example, along the top here, we've got this nice pattern inlaid to the plastic, and in the door cards here, I particularly appreciate this one because it's a hard wearing material, but we've also got this nice cut-in pattern here, said to be inspired by Japanese origami. So a bit of a nod back to Isuzu HQ there. But looking at the interior more broadly, look, it is fairly similar to what we've been used to. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We've got a good amount of storage. We've got a little bit up here in the dashboard. We've got a secondary glove box up here and a good sized one just under my arm. There's also some cup holders here in the center and room for a big bottle in the door. So that's very lovely indeed. I think it's also worth noting that as this ute starts to get dangerously close to $70,000, that I would start to expect a little bit better in terms of build quality. So for example, this center console here does move a little bit when I press it. You know, I'm not exactly wrenching it off its hinges either. And this gloss black here, I don't think is gonna wear very well. I think that can go in the bin. Though it's not as bad as what we've seen on the new Triton, which is just like a whole swath of gloss black. So, you know, there could be some improvements there. As far as features that would have been great to see, well, look, this one isn't the end of the world because the D-Max actually has really quite good air conditioning, but it would have been good to see some cooled seats in this one. You know, some really hot days like we've got today out in Queensland, it'd be great to have that come through, quickly cool you down, and it uses less energy than a traditional aircon unit. The seats themselves though are really quite good, and it's great to see that they've retained this similar design. They're quite form-fitting and they're good on longer trips. Though I will note that it would have been great to see slightly better than 4 ways of adjustment on the passenger side for this X-Terrain. You know, we're starting to get up there in the bit of the luxury price ranges. You know, a few more features and a few more degrees of adjustability, and especially a bit more lumbar support would have been lovely to see. Jumping into the back seat now, look, it's never particularly great in the back of a dual cab, but this one certainly isn't too bad. Now I'm sitting behind my in driving position, I'm 6 foot tall, got, look, a little bit of knee room and a little bit of toe room. Not having a great time back here, I will say, and that's mainly owing to the higher floor. It's much better, I will say, in the MUX, and that's sort of more designed for passengers, I will say. But look, overall, this is a decent back seat for a dual cab. We've got some air vents down here, and we've got more of those USB-C ports that I was talking about in the front. And there are some other good bits as well, like we've got some nice big grab handles here if you go off-roading, another one up here to hang stuff on. And up here in the ceiling, we've got some extra speakers for the surround sound system. So that's very nice indeed. But I think really the party piece of this car comes from its storage solutions. Now, one thing I always love to see in the back of utes is the ability to flip up the seats individually, like so. So this goes around the headrest and it holds up this seat and it gets it out the way. And anyone who owns a ute will tell you that this is a great idea, because if you've gone to the shops, for example, and you haven't got something that's quite big enough that you want to put it in the tray and get thrown around, this is a good place to store stuff. So what's it like to drive the 2024 Isuzu D-Max? Well, let's start with what hasn't changed first. And so we're talking about things like steering, suspension, brakes. All those have been unchanged with the facelift. They're pretty happy with the balance overall as is. So if you've driven a D-Max before, the vast majority of the driving experience will be familiar to you. We've still got the 3-litre turbo diesel engine in here. We know it, we love it. It's a fantastic rig. I'm in the LSU Plus variant right now, same running gear as across the bulk of the range. So with that one, we have a really good breadth of ability, I think. The figures aren't that amazing, especially in light of the increased competition out there. We've got 140 kilowatts of power that kicks in at 3,600 RPM. Torque starts pretty low, about 1,600 to 2,600 RPM, and that's at a peak of 450. So as I said, not really incredible figures there, but still fairly impressive overall, I think, when it comes to the driving experience. The reason for that is I think this is one of those motors that it's probably owes to its rather large displacement of 3 litres, which simply isn't very bothered when you start to load it up. No, it's not very quick at all. But we've done a few exercises here, a bit of off-roading and a bit of towing out here on the launch of the 2024 D-Max. And I do notice that in comparison to some of its rivals out there, it seems like the peaks of its ability aren't as hampered by adding extra weight. And, you know, we towed some pretty significant loads with this. I was towing a 3.2 ton boat at one point. You know, pretty serious weight, not far off its braked maximum in this 3 litre of 3.5 tons. And so, you know, I think that was a real pleasant surprise, I gotta say. And that also does come through to the driving experience on road. One thing I will say though is that this engine really isn't the most refined in its class. And that comes to both the amount of noise it makes, but also its power delivery. It's very off and on, kicks in all of a sudden, and that can get really annoying sometimes, you know, like you're just trying to get up to a gentle speed driving around town and it just, you know, it's a bit of a kick in the pants. Like it's not violent, but it is annoying in comparison to some rivals out there with some bi-turbo setups. I'm thinking Triton, I'm thinking the Ford Ranger, of course, or even, of course, the V6 options out there like they have in the Ranger and the Amarok. So those engines in comparison, you know, particularly the Ranger, which is a still fairly large displacement in that V6, has a similar relaxed feeling, but lacks the sudden power delivery of this engine. And really, I think when you're trying to do more technical work or even just trying to drive around town, that is something which I would personally prefer in a vehicle. But is it the end of the world? No. We'll also touch quickly on the 1.9 litre. Now, interestingly, Isuzu hasn't expanded this engine further into the range. It's been around since 2022, but it still remains on the entry-level variant, the SX. So that one is significantly down on power and torque. So 110 kilowatts and 350 newton meters. That torque in particular, 100 newton meters, is a bit of a loss, but I will say that in practice, it's not as bad. You have a good amount of mid-range with that motor. It's just a shame that they don't offer it on anything higher than the SX grade. So, you know, I suppose that is what it is for the moment. In regards to other parts of the driveline, look, this is available with a 6-speed manual on some of the more commercial grades. I've driven it, it's fun, it's a nice little easy manual to drive, but I'm in the 6-speed automatic, which the vast majority of people buy. And look, it's okay, it's just fine. It stays out of your way, which a gearbox should. It's nothing to ride home about, but it also doesn't get in your way. There are some times when it gets a little bit confused, and I found that a little bit annoying, and there are some other times where it can be a little bit sudden in its gear changes, and it sends that shove through to the cabin, which is, you know, obviously not ideal. So what about when the power gets to the driven wheels? Well, I think this is another one which is another unfortunate result of the D-Max starting to get a little bit older in its class, because we are starting to see more rivals out there adopt full-time four-wheel drive systems. Of course, the Triton had it in the last gen and it's got it in its new gen, and the Ranger and the Amarok, of course, both have that in the V6, and the Ranger has adopted the full-time four-wheel drive system for the bi-turbo variant as well. So it is starting to get a little bit further out there, and of course, there are some Chinese rivals out there which have variations of full-time four-wheel drives. Now, it's not the end of the world, but I do think it limits the on-road performance. Personally, when I'm driving in some wet weather with an unloaded tray, I do get a little bit sketched out when it comes to driving and taking a corner a little bit too hard. And, you know, I'm confident in my ability to handle a car in that situation, but I do worry about my relatives and other people who are a little bit less experienced behind the wheel would handle a situation where perhaps the ute would step out in some wet weather. So there is definitely that peace of mind aspect about having a full-time four-wheel drive system, but I do think also when you're going off and on the bitumen in areas of South Australia's outback and things like that, it's great to just set and forget, but you can't have it all, I suppose. I will also note that in terms of ride comfort, as I said, this one hasn't been changed in terms of suspension, but it remains probably on the lower half when it comes to the comfort in this segment. It's fine, but it's not brilliant. It's better than a Hilux, I'll certainly give it that, but there are times when some interruptions came crashing through the system, and when you get off-road a little bit more, you do start to get thrown around just a little bit. So what about safety? Well, this might not be the first thing you think about when buying a ute, but it's something that I think more people should think about and probably are thinking about nowadays, that utes are becoming more family vehicles. And it's something that the D-Max has always held up fairly strong with, because of course it was one of the first to go through the 2020 ANCAP regulations, which really clamped down and introduced more active safety kit. Now, that isn't always a good thing, as we do like to point out on Chasing Cars. Yes, we do like a lot of this modern technology, but we don't like it when it's poorly tuned to the fact that it ends up being a detriment to the driving and indeed the safety experience. And Isuzu has listened to customers in this regard. Mainly, that's in regards to lane keep. And if anyone drove the old D-Max, they'll know that it was really quite overzealous. It's quite grabby and just kind of zigzagged you across the lane far more than it should have, to the point where it was really quite distracting. I know the vast majority of people in our office, as soon as they got in a D-Max, they were turning that straight off. Thankfully, they came up with a method to turn it off nice and quickly via the steering wheel, but nevertheless, you do want to kind of be using these features, not just turning off. Otherwise, they're just kind of a waste of everyone's time and money. So with that recalibration, look, it is fairly good. I haven't had a lot of time to drive this on public roads to reevaluate it, but Isuzu is pretty confident in the work they've done. That one is going to need some more testing back at base before we can categorically say that it's better than the old one though. In terms of other parts of the safety package, well, Isuzu has taken the module which mainly monitors the AEB situation, and they've given it a much wider field of view. And it's one to look out for, because a lot of brands palm off and say, oh yes, it's got AEB, or no, it doesn't, but not all AEB is created equal. Now, it looks further on, and it also has a wider field of view, as I said. And that's really good, especially for pedestrians and cyclists, which are some of the more difficult objects for AEB to see. There's been a few other upgrades as well, notably rear cross traffic brake, though I will point out that that is not the same thing as reversing AEB, in that it doesn't detect stationary objects when you're reversing into things. Mainly, what it's designed to do is that if you're, for example, in a lineup of cars parked along the shoreline or something, when you chuck it in reverse, your visibility is not all that great, and it detects another car or bicycle coming along, it's going to slam on the brakes to prevent an accident. Unfortunately, what it's not going to do is prevent those sort of Westfield car park situations where you reverse into a pole, or even if someone's just standing behind your ute not paying attention. Personally, as a family buyer, that is one that I would probably be a little bit disappointed with. Lastly, one of the upgrades they've made, which is technically a safety feature, is the adaptive cruise control system, which they've now renamed to Intelligent Adaptive Cruise Control. And the reason they've done that is because it can come to a complete stop before setting off again. Gives you a few seconds before you do that, or you have to sort of give it a budge if you're sitting in traffic for ages. But nevertheless, it's fantastic that it now has that capability. And if you're on the East Coast and you've been in some serious traffic jams of late, that is definitely something that would be a deciding factor in my purchase decision. And notably, it's also available on the manual, which is really quite commendable, because fortunately manuals really do seem to get neglected when it comes to these safety features. So that's what it drives like on-road. What does it drive like off-road? Well, this is always a good bit of fun, isn't it? The D-Max has always been a great thing when it comes to going off-road, but Isuzu has sought to make a few changes here or there to make it just that little bit better. So a few numbers for you. It's got an 800mm wading depth, and as I'm about to challenge right now on this hill here, 240mm of ground clearance. And you know, this is another instance where this 3-litre engine is just really quite good. You know, it's so relaxed, and when you lean on it, that torque comes in from a really low base in the RPM. That's good, just nice and easy. So one of the simple changes Isuzu has made, which I think is kind of nice, is when you let your tyres down at the beach and you start to reinflate them again, the car is going to sound off its indicators and beep at you once you're back up to placard pressures. Of course, personally, I'd be inclined to check it again with my tyre pressure in hand, you know, one of the good old manual ones. But, you know, it's good to know that you're roughly in the range without having to constantly swap to and from your pump if it doesn't have a dial on it. But the most significant change that Isuzu has made when it comes to off-road ability in this facelift is the introduction of rough terrain mode. Now, if you've driven an NUX, you'll be familiar with this software. Essentially what it is it's an enhanced version of traction control, because it can be a little bit slack at times in the D-Max. And this iteration, essentially, it clamps down from a lower RPM so you can get your wheels spinning in the air for less of the time and get on your way more of the time. So really great to see. Now, this is a version progressed beyond what the MUX has. And essentially, the key difference is that you can still have the rear diff yourself locked when you're driving. So really great stuff to see. Now, Isuzu's taken us through some driving challenges today, and it's been really interesting to see how well it has performed. Yes, I was able to get through the challenges without this technology working. However, it was great to see how much easier it was once I had rough terrain mode engaged, and even easier again, of course, once I had the rear diff locked. So of course I was able to get through some of the challenges here today without it, but I do think there will be some instances where perhaps you wouldn't be able to get through some obstacles, and this technology will be the difference there. So certainly something to consider if you're looking at getting a new 4x4. One thing I'll point out also is that you can use rough terrain mode in 2 high, 4 high, and 4 low, which means if you're looking for something to get a little bit more traction without having to activate low range, it is a nice little simple step. When the current generation D-Max launched back in 2020, it was really the first of a whole new crop of utes coming into this country. Since then, we've had new rivals like the Ford Ranger and Volkswagen Amarok come in for a new generation, along with new entrants like the Mitsubishi Triton, which has just burst onto the scene. So what is this facelift for? So the facelift is essentially to keep the D-Max up to date with the rest of the crowd. So have they pulled it off? Well, the good news is if you like the current Isuzu D-Max, you're certainly going to like this one, as it really is an upgrade for the fans, this one, with Isuzu combing through the list of complaints and addressing some small, but I would still say important intricacies that do start to matter more and more when you own a vehicle like this long term. But even with this latest list of upgrades, I'm not quite sure it's breaking even with the current competition, and that's fine to a certain degree. The Isuzu D-Max has its own niche and it tries to fill it well, but it doesn't mean it can't improve. It'd be great to see some things like full-time four-wheel drive feature on this model, for example, or even a new hybrid engine. We still really haven't seen much on that front because Isuzu still seems to be thinking about it. But what about if you're a current owner? Is it worth upgrading to this model? Well, we still need to do more testing on it and taking it on some local roads around Sydney where we usually take our vehicles to test them. But I do think for now there are some meaningful upgrades in the rough terrain road most notably, and also some basic things like a better quality reversing camera, which is certainly nice. But unless your rig has got hundreds of thousands of Ks on the clock, I'm not sure I'd be rushing out and eating the depreciation on trading that model in just yet. But look, those are just my thoughts, and please let me know down in the comments what you think of this facelift. Do you think they could have done more? Do you think it's fine how it is? Don't forget to like this video if you did indeed like it. Subscribe if you want to see more. But for now, that's all. Thank you for watching Chasing Cars.